An image like no other, inspiring decades of research and debate. The Shroud of Turin, that's a piece of history, and it has an ongoing puzzle for scientists.
He was wrapped in linen, and then his body was put in the tomb.
Multiple independent tests say one thing. A famous carbon dating study says another. One group of scientists called the results contaminated. The other group won't admit it. For 35 years, this contradiction has been buried. And what we're about to show you explains why. In Turin, Italy, a piece of linen sits behind bulletproof glass. It doesn't look like much. Faint stains. A ghostly outline. But what scientists have found on this cloth challenges everything we thought we understood about history, science, and what's actually possible. The official story. A medieval forgery from the 1300s. Case closed, except the evidence doesn't match that story. Not even close. We're talking about pollen from plants that don't grow in Europe. Dust from Jerusalem's walls. Blood patterns that match only one person in history. And then something else. Something that made physicists recalculate their entire understanding of what's possible. If this message speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts below. Leave a prayer in the comments and stand firm in your faith. This is the Shroud of Turin, and the latest evidence has left scientists with no explanation. If you visited the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin right now, you'd walk into a side chapel. The air would be cool, the light would be dim, and behind reinforced glass, you'd see it. A rectangular piece of linen. About 14 feet long. Off-white color with faint brown markings. Most tourists walk past it in seconds. It doesn't look important. It doesn't look ancient. It certainly doesn't look like the most documented artifact in human history. But here's what those tourists don't realize. We actually know more about where this cloth has been than we know about most famous paintings or sculptures. No guesses. Not theories. Actual documented proof. Starting in the 1300s, the chain of custody became crystal clear. Church records. Legal documents. Eyewitness accounts. All of them trace the shroud's location with precision. It moved from place to place across Europe, but every single movement was recorded. Witnessed. Documented. Walk backwards from there, though, and it gets interesting. Before the 1300s, the trail got fuzzy. Scattered references. Ancient texts that mention something that might be this cloth. Historians debating whether this reference or that reference actually applies. It's the kind of stuff that keeps academics arguing at conferences for decades. But here's the thing that bothers skeptics. If we're being completely honest about the evidence, not what we want to believe, but what the evidence actually shows, there's a strong case that this cloth originated somewhere very specific. Jerusalem. The exact place where Jesus was crucified. How do we know that? Not from old stories. Not from religious texts. From microscopic particles embedded in the fibers themselves. In 1978, scientists got access to examine the shroud directly. They weren't there to prove it was real. Many of them actually expected to easily prove it was fake. Medieval monks with paintbrushes. That's what they thought they'd find. Instead, they found something different. They collected particles embedded deep in the cloth's fibers. Pollen grains. Limestone dust. Material that had been there for centuries, pressed into the weave itself. When botanists analyzed the pollen, they identified plant species native to the Middle East. Some plants that grow specifically around Israel. Plants that don't grow anywhere in Italy or France. Then they found the limestone. Microscopic dust that matched the stone outside Jerusalem's walls so perfectly that scientists could say with certainty where it came from. But the most interesting part, where they found this dust. Not scattered randomly across the cloth. Concentrated in specific spots. The feet. The knees. The nose. The exact places where the body would have fallen forward while carrying something heavy. Like a cross, perhaps. When fabric experts examined the shroud itself, they noticed something immediately. This wasn't ordinary cloth. This was expensive. Really expensive. Fine linen woven in a sophisticated pattern. The kind of fabric a skilled craftsman would create for someone with significant wealth. This creates a problem for skeptics. A big one. Archaeologists have excavated hundreds of burial cloths from Roman-era Judea. Hundreds. When you look at what people actually used to wrap bodies during that time and place, you see a pattern. Simple linen. Plain weave. Strips that wrapped around the body multiple times. Not a single expensive bolt of cloth is used as one piece. That wasn't how people buried their dead. That wasn't the custom. So if this shroud is truly from that time and place, it shouldn't exist. It goes against everything we know about burial practices. But then you read the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all describe Jesus' burial. And they all use the same specific word for the cloth that Joseph of Arimathea purchased. Sindon. A single piece of fine linen. Not strips. Not bands. One expensive cloth. Joseph of Arimathea. Matthew specifically describes him as a wealthy man, rich enough to own a tomb, rich enough to purchase expensive burial cloth. So you have a choice here. Either the Gospels got that detail wrong, or this cloth is exactly what you'd expect if Jesus was actually buried this way. But here's where it gets strange. Medieval forgers, if they existed, would have used what was available to them. Medieval cloth, medieval weaving patterns. Why would they spend enormous effort creating expensive linen in an ancient pattern if nobody could even verify it was accurate? It doesn't make logical sense. Unless someone really did want to recreate what actually happened. Someone who cared enough about authenticity to get the smallest details right. Someone who understood the burial customs of first-century Jerusalem well enough to reproduce them exactly. That level of detail requires knowledge. Knowledge that wouldn't be common in medieval Europe. Knowledge that wouldn't exist in any historical texts available at that time. But we're just getting started. Because the cloth itself was only the beginning. Scientists were about to discover something much more difficult to explain. When forensic pathologists examined the bloodstains on the shroud, they brought their experience with crime scenes. Their understanding of how blood flows. How it dries. What it tells you about what happened to a body. What they found was specific. Detailed. Consistent with documented historical accounts of Roman crucifixion. Nearly 700 scourge marks across the front and back of the body. The kind of marks left by a whip with multiple strands. A Roman flagellum. Historians have written about this weapon extensively. We know what it does to human flesh. And the marks on the shroud match that description exactly. Then there are the nail wounds. Feet and wrists. But here's something most people don't know. Roman crucifixion wasn't standardized. Soldiers had some flexibility in how they nailed a person to a cross. Different positions. Different angles. The blood patterns on the shroud show something very specific. The arms were in two different positions while the blood was flowing. That's not random. That's forensic evidence of exactly what happened during the crucifixion process. Then there's the crown of thorns. Over 50 distinct wounds on the scalp and the nape of the neck. Wounds separate from the scourging marks. Wounds consistent with a cap or crown made of sharp thorns pushed into the head. Here's the problem for skeptics. There is no documented evidence of anyone else ever being crucified with a crown of thorns. None. Not in any historical text. Not in any archaeological record. This detail appears only in the gospel accounts of Jesus. Only one person in history was crucified this way. But we haven't gotten to the spear wound yet. On the right side of the body, between the 5th and 6th rib, there's a single elliptical wound. The blood stain shows a wound that matches the dimensions of a Roman lança. That's the standard issue spear carried by Roman foot soldiers. Same width, same length, exactly what you'd expect from that specific weapon. The blood from this wound was tested as post-mortem. The person was already dead when the spear pierced him. Here's what makes this relevant. The Gospel of John describes a specific moment after Jesus died. A Roman soldier pierces his side with a spear. Blood and water flow out. That's not in the other Gospels. Only John mentions this detail. And the shroud shows exactly what John described. But there's one more thing about this wound that scientists still can't explain. When forensic scientists examined the blood on the shroud more closely, they made discoveries that deepened the mystery. This wasn't just blood. This was blood from someone who had suffered catastrophic physical trauma. The hemoglobin levels were consistent with severe blood loss. The bilirubin levels indicated extreme stress. The protein chemistry matched what you'd find in someone who had endured the specific torture of crucifixion. A medieval forger couldn't have painted this. Paint doesn't have hemoglobin. Paint doesn't have bilirubin. Paint doesn't carry the chemical markers of genuine human suffering. Which means if this is a forgery, the forger would have needed actual human blood. Blood from an actual person who had actually been scourged, crucified, and speared in exactly the way described in the Gospels. Think about that for a moment. Think about what that would require. A medieval forger would need to find someone willing to be tortured, willing to be crucified, willing to have their side pierced with a spear after death. Also, the forger could collect their blood and apply it to a cloth in patterns consistent with forensic blood flow analysis. But forensic blood flow analysis didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Blood spatter analysis didn't exist. The science of understanding how blood flows from wounds didn't exist. So the forger would need to somehow know what modern forensic science would discover centuries later, and then create blood patterns that would pass that analysis, without any way to test whether they were right, without any way to know if future scientists would have the tools to verify it. That's not logical. That's not even remotely possible, unless the blood is actually from the person the cloth claims to come from. But then you have another problem. When scientists examined the blood stains carefully, they found something around the spear wound that's visible only under magnification. Halos. Clear rings around the wound that can't be seen with the naked eye. These halos indicate serum separation. What happens when blood has been sitting against cloth for a specific amount of time? A specific time frame. When forensic pathologists analyzed these patterns, they determined something remarkable. The body had been in contact with the cloth for approximately 36 to 40 hours. That's very specific. And it matches something very specific from history. If you read the gospel accounts of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, the timeline is very clear. He was crucified on Friday afternoon. He died on Friday. His body was placed in a tomb Friday evening. Then came Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath. No movement. No disturbance of the body. Sunday morning, according to all four Gospels, Mary Magdalene found the tomb empty. The cloth was still there, but the body was gone. That's approximately 36 to 40 hours. Friday evening to Sunday morning. The blood stains on the shroud, analyzed by forensic pathologists using serum separation patterns, indicate the body was in contact with the cloth for 36 to 40 hours. The Gospel accounts and the forensic evidence match exactly. This isn't a coincidence. This is precision. But here's where the skeptical argument usually shows up. Someone will say, well, maybe it's a clever forgery. Maybe medieval monks read the Gospels and created the cloth to match the timeline. That's theoretically possible. Except for one problem. Medieval monks couldn't have known that serum separation patterns would ever be discovered. Forensic pathology didn't exist. The science of analyzing blood at a microscopic level didn't exist. There was no way for them to know that centuries later, scientists would have tools to measure exactly how long blood had been in contact with cloth. So even if they wanted to create a forgery that matched the timeline, they had no way to know how to create the specific forensic markers that would later prove that timeline. This is the pattern we keep seeing. Detail after detail on this cloth requires knowledge that wouldn't exist for centuries. Knowledge that medieval forgers couldn't possibly have possessed. But the physical evidence isn't finished yet. Because there's something else on this cloth that no scientist has ever been able to explain or replicate. In 1898, an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia was given permission to photograph the shroud. This wasn't high-tech. It was basic photography. A camera, a glass plate, chemicals in a darkroom. When Pia developed his photograph that night, something unexpected happened. What most people see when they look at the shroud is a faint ghostly discoloration. Barely visible. Hard to make out. But in the photographic negative, something changed. The image reversed. And suddenly, instead of a blur, Pia saw clarity. He saw facial features. He saw a human body. He nearly dropped the glass plate. What Pia discovered was that the shroud itself possesses a photographic negative quality. The cloth is negative. What you see with your eyes is the negative version of the image. The true image only becomes clear when photographed. This is bizarre. No medieval cloth does this. No painting. Nothing created by human hands has ever exhibited this property. But it gets stranger. In 1976, researchers fed an image of the shroud into a VP8 image analyzer. This was a device developed by NASA to convert photographs into topographical maps. Scientists use it to map the surfaces of planets. When you feed a normal photograph into a VP8 analyzer, it produces distorted results. That's because brightness doesn't usually correspond to depth. A bright spot on a photo doesn't tell you how far away something is. Unless the subject is creating light. Unless something is emanating energy outward. When the results came back for the shroud, the analyzer produced a perfect three-dimensional relief of a human body. Facial features are perfectly contoured. Chest muscles visible. Arms perfectly shaped. Every detail in 3 dimensions. The image on the shroud didn't just record what a body looked like. It encoded the precise distance between the cloth and the body at every single point of contact. No painting has ever done this. No photograph. Nothing created by human hands. Scientists spent 3 years analyzing this image in laboratory conditions. They were looking for pigments. Looking for paints. Looking for dyes. Looking for anything that would explain how this image was created. They found nothing. What they did find was this: the image is a faint oxidation of the linen fibers themselves. The discoloration exists only on the outermost surface of the outermost fibers. It penetrates to a depth of just 0.2 micrometers. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 1,000 times thinner than the average human hair. Whatever created this image chemically altered the fibers of the cloth with submicroscopic precision. Across the entire surface of a human body, scientists wanted to know, could this image be replicated? If someone wanted to create a forgery, could they reproduce this effect? A research team at Italy's ENEA Research Center decided to find out. They spent 5 years trying to recreate the image using state-of-the-art excimer lasers. These aren't ordinary lasers. They fire pulses of vacuum ultraviolet radiation. Powerful stuff. They succeeded in creating a faint shroud-like discoloration on small patches of linen. About a centimeter wide. They could do it. It was possible. but they calculated what it would take to reproduce this effect across the entire surface of the shroud. 34 trillion watts of energy, released in a fraction of a second. That's 10 times the entire electrical output of the global power grid. All of it was released at once, simultaneously. And that's the best theory scientists have for how this image could have been created. If this is accurate, it would mean that something inside the tomb released an inconceivable amount of energy from every direction, from the entire surface of the body simultaneously, outward in all directions at once. Medieval technology couldn't do that. Modern technology barely could. We'd need to build a reactor specifically designed to do it, and we'd probably blow out the power grid in the process. But the forger would need to do this without leaving any burn marks on the cloth, without burning the fabric itself, without any visible damage. Just a perfect, submicroscopic alteration of the fibers. The forgery theory doesn't just struggle with this. It collapses entirely. Because here's the reality, there's no mechanism in existence that medieval forgers could have used to create this image. Not paint. Not fire. Not chemicals. Nothing. The official explanation for the shroud is that it's a medieval forgery. But the evidence on this cloth requires technology and knowledge that wouldn't exist for centuries after the Middle Ages. So we have a contradiction. The official story doesn't match the evidence. The evidence doesn't match what's possible. Which means either the evidence is lying or the official story is wrong. But there's one more thing. One more piece of evidence that nobody wants to talk about. In 1988, scientists were finally allowed to take a small sample of the shroud to conduct radiocarbon dating. This should have answered the question once and for all. Carbon-14 decays at a predictable rate. Measure what remains in a sample, and you can determine when the cloth was created. Scientists can usually do this with up to 95% confidence. The results came back. The shroud dated between 1260 and 1390 AD. The Middle Ages. This seemed to settle it. Medieval forgery. Case closed. And for decades, this single study has dominated every conversation about the shroud's authenticity. Except there's a problem with how that study was conducted. The original testing protocol called for 5 to 7 samples to be taken from different locations across the cloth. Multiple sites. Multiple laboratories. Multiple methods. This would have given scientists confidence in the results. But at the last minute, the protocol was overruled. Instead of 5 to 7 samples from across the cloth, scientists were allowed to take only one sample. From one location. A corner of the shroud. A corner that was visibly contaminated. Under ultraviolet light, scientists discovered something interesting. That corner was chemically different from the rest of the cloth. And when the fibers were examined closely, they contained cotton threads woven into the linen. This wasn't original cloth. This was a medieval repair. Someone had patched the shroud centuries ago, and scientists had dated the patch instead of the original cloth. All 3 laboratories that conducted the original test later rejected their own findings. They said the data was unreliable. They said the sample wasn't representative of the entire cloth. One of the labs even stated they weren't anywhere close to 95% confidence. Their own results were compromised. But here's what's interesting. 5 other independent dating methods have been applied to the shroud. Vanillin degradation, infrared spectroscopy, Raman spectroscopy, mechanical fiber testing, X-ray diffraction. Every single one of them placed the shroud's origin in the 1st century. Not the Middle Ages. The 1st century. So you have one contaminated test from 1988 that's been rejected by the labs that produced it. And 5 other independent tests that all point to the 1st century. Which evidence should we believe? The official narrative has clung to the 1988 test for 35 years. Even though the labs themselves said the test was flawed. Even though other evidence contradicts it. This is the contradiction that's been buried for decades. So here's where we are. We have pollen from Jerusalem embedded in the cloth. Limestone dust from outside Jerusalem's walls. Blood stains matching a specific crucifixion described only in one historical account. A timeline matching the Gospels exactly. An image that encodes 3-dimensional data in a way that shouldn't be possible. And an explanation for that image that would require 34 trillion watts of energy released simultaneously. All of this contradicts the official story that this is a medieval forgery. But science can only take us so far. Science can tell us what the evidence shows. Science can tell us what would be required to create this cloth using known mechanisms. Science can even tell us that no known mechanism could have created this image. What science cannot tell us is what actually happened inside the tomb in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. There's only one historical account that describes a crucified man wrapped in linen undergoing a transformation. A transformation that no natural cause can account for. Leaving behind an empty tomb and a cloth that once bound him. The Apostle John ran to that tomb on the morning the cloth was found empty. He looked inside. He saw the linen cloth lying there, empty. And something shifted inside of him. In his own words, he saw and he believed. We have the evidence. We have the cloth. We have the pollen and the dust and the blood and the image that science still cannot explain. The question isn't whether the evidence points to something extraordinary. The evidence overwhelmingly points to something that science can't account for. The question is, what will you do with that evidence? Because there are really only two possibilities. Either this cloth is the most elaborate medieval forgery ever created, made with knowledge and technology that wouldn't exist for centuries. Or it's something else entirely. Something that changes everything. And the choice of which to believe doesn't come down to science anymore.